This video will show you how to properly install axle repair bearings on your most popular GM, Chrysler, and Ford axles. After removing the differential cover and removing the pinion shaft, we need to remove the C-clip that holds the axle in place against the side gear. Have an assistant push in the axle and then remove the C-clip, and then you'll be ready to slide the axle out. After removing the seal, now it's time to remove that axle bearing. Before we install the axle saver bearing, a couple checks we're going to need to make. First, on the axle, making sure that the riding surface of the seal and the bearing is not corroded or have any type of imperfections that would prevent the seal from sealing on this axle right here. Now, before we go ahead and install this axle saver bearing, there's one measurement we need to take right now, and to make sure that this axle tube is not a narrowed tube. On certain applications, tubes on the inside here where the axle bearing originally sat, they actually have a taper going inboard where it actually narrows. Now, if that's the case and you have a narrowed tube, you cannot use an axle saver bearing on that application. And what you'll need to measure it is a snap gauge or telescopic gauge, and what you're going to want to do is you want to take a measurement by sticking it all the way in, snapping it, center it, take it out, and then use an outside micrometer and take a measurement on it, and you're going to measure from the inside of that tube and right up against where that shoulder is. You're going to measure it in there too. And now if the inside measurement is actually smaller than your outside measurement right here, then you cannot use that axle saver bearing, and that means that you have a narrowed axle tube. Now, the second measurement we're going to take before we install this axle saver bearing is measuring the width of this axle saver bearing versus the depth inside the axle tube. Now, what you don't want to have is when you put the axle saver bearing into the tube, you do not want to have more than 1/4 of an inch hanging out past the tube. So those are some of the measurements you want to take, and just compare them using a caliper and get your depth measurement right, and then also make sure that you measure the OD of the axle saver bearing versus the ID of the axle tube. And always remember, the seal always goes on the outside. So this is the way it'll look before we install it. Now that we've taken our measurements and found that this axle will actually accept the axle saver bearing, now it's time to lubricate the brand new bearing. So all we're going to do is take our gear lube, run it all the way around the new axle saver bearing, get it on the seal, get it nice into the bearing right there, through all the rollers, and we're all set, ready to install. Now, using a suitable installer tool and a nice big hammer, you can take it and drive it right into place. After hearing the dead thump, we know we're fully installed. So now you can go ahead and reinstall your axle shaft into the axle. Now that we have our axle in place, now it's time to put our C-clip aside, locked into place, and then install your pinion shaft. And always remember, when you're installing your pinion shaft and you put your lock bolt in there, make sure you lock tight that bolt. When choosing a replacement part for your vehicle, don't compromise safety. Install confidence with SKF bearings and seals. For more product info, visit skfpartsinfo.com or follow us on Twitter at skfpartsinfo.